This episode is being brought to you in part by Veeva Systems. Veeva connects patients, sites, sponsors, all on a single technology ecosystem to make clinical trials easier and faster. Look, you guys are probably getting sick of hearing me talk about Site Vault, but frankly, it's made a huge difference in, getting rid of all the ridiculous paper binders, but also just being more efficient in managing our regulatory and ensuring that everyone has access to all the most current ICFs, protocol amendments, etc., and very easily able to share those with our study sponsors. So all in all, it's been a huge win for us as a site. There's almost 5,000 sites using SiteVault and more than 400 industry sponsors using Veeva clinical applications. It's pretty insane that about 65% of all global clinical trials run on Veeva. So what are you waiting for? Go check out sites.veeva.com today. SiteVault is completely free for sites to use, so there's more and more regulatory management options coming to market, but this one is free and works amazingly. Once again, that's sites.veeva.com. This episode is also being brought to you in part by Real-Time CTMS, a leading provider of innovative software solutions for clinical trial research sites, site networks, sponsors, and CROs. Look, we'd be lost as a site without Real-Time CTMS. It allows us to track all of our study visits, ensure that we're being paid the correct amounts. Getting payment on time is another issue, but at least we know what we're owed, and we're able to track that very closely and accurately with Real-Time. They also have amazing customer service, so go get a free demo. Check out realtime-ctms.com and complete one of their contact forms. Hello and welcome to the Note to File podcast, a collection of interviews, best practices, and candid commentary for clinical research sites. I'm your host, Brad Hightower. I just want to take one moment and draw attention to our weekly live streams, which have already been great. Been off to a great start. Speaking with Raymond Nomizu of CRO, a lot of audience participation. So head on over to YouTube, subscribe to Note to File podcast, and make sure that you jump in and make your voice heard in our weekly live streams. Our guest this week is Jennifer Bonfrisco. Jennifer spent over 30 years working in R&D for pharma, CROs, and academia. She began her career in preclinical pharm/tox, transitioned to clinical research, and has never looked back. Over the years, some things have changed, but slow patient enrollment and barriers to participation have remained. Trial accessibility was the spark that led Jennifer to create Corlexia Clinical Services. She spent years finding ways to make trials more patient and doctor-friendly, and led her to create a company dedicated to building customized trial solutions, resulting in reaching more medical practices, patients, and families. Corlexia partners with organizations to enhance their strategy for clinical development, regulatory affairs, and clinical trial marketing. In this episode, we discuss the importance of community engagement, the need for human connection all throughout the patient recruitment process, and rethinking physician referrals. So without further ado, Jennifer Bonfrisco. All right. Thanks for joining us today, Jennifer Bonfrisco. How are you doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. Where are you at?
I'm right outside of Philadelphia. It's in Bucks County, PA. So it's kind of right between New Jersey and Philadelphia. So we're right in the hub of Pharma Mecca.
Yeah, nice. Certainly, busy area. A little different than Oklahoma City here. You certainly got a lot more action.
Yeah, we do. We have Princeton, and we have Johnson & Johnson, and we have Carnegie Center. There's so much going on, especially all these little biotechs.
Nice. Well, I'm going to jump right in like we normally do here, and always like to hear about people's sort of backgrounds, what brought them into the clinical trial industry. It's always kind of cool to hear, different roles people have held and how that sort of shaped what they do today. So if you would, humor us, tell us a bit about your background and sort of your clinical trial origin story, if you would.
So I'll go way, way back just for a second. I graduated at a degree in biology, and I always wanted to be a veterinarian. So, like many of us back in the 90s, I didn't know what it meant to have a biology degree, right? So I started working at big pharma for a veterinarian and was doing more preclinical work. And then I found out about clinical. So that's really it. I was very fortunate back in the 90s when it was even harder to get into industry. but I was working for Big Pharma, so Wyeth at the time, and I transferred into phase 1 clinical. So I love that I had this path because, I was able to learn from the best, really, the Big Pharma. And then I followed the typical kind of path that a lot of us follow. I started in as a CRA and spent probably about 15 years on the road, for Big Pharma, small, after I left Wyeth. So Wyeth was phase 1, healthy volunteers. And that was, again, back in the day when a lot of people had their own phase 1 clinics. And we had one right in Philadelphia. So it was great. I got to really learn, because we'd go on site, we'd see the patients, all the more hands-on stuff that you do in phase 1. And then transitioned over to more of the phase 2, 3s and the sicker populations, worked for Sanofi in oncology back in the day when we were working on oxaliplatin and way back there. So anyway, so that continued on until I got more, project management and moved up the ladder. And really about 15 years ago, I fell in love with smaller biotechs. And I've kind of stayed there ever since. The last company I was working for was a little biotech called Airpio in Cincinnati. And I just adored it. So there was about 22 of us at the end. And it was just exciting. We were involved in everything. But what happened there was we had a drug that I loved, I was very committed to. And it was a drug for inflammatory bowel disease. And we were trying to develop it. We were a tiny biotech. And we didn't have enough money to do both drugs. We had an ophthalmology program and we had a GI program. So we took the decision, okay, let's put all our eggs in the ophthalmology division, even though we knew the GI thing was pretty, promising. And I found that frustrating because we wanted to develop it, but the economics just didn't make sense. So when we headed off to one of the larger GI conferences and I said, oh, can we run this trial, and we found out about the recruitment rates being abysmal and the fees to do it, we were really forced to license it out. So anyway, after that, unfortunately, our ophthalmology drug failed and the company closed. So we all flew to Cincinnati and cried the night away at our hotel. That was the end of that wonderful company. But so that's why I then decided to create Corlexia. And the primary reason was because I enjoyed the small biotech so much and the camaraderie we had and the things we got to do together. The thought of going back to a giant biotech I just couldn't do it. So, and I really feel like there is an enormous need for what we do and what you do, Brad, smaller centers, community sites, being more engaged. And that's why I started the company. So originally I started Corlexia because I wanted to develop a network of community sites. And for our listeners, that's how I got to know Brad because I was following what you were doing. And I called you and said, what's this all about? I want to learn. Ultimately, I realized that for me, my area of expertise is more of the operations. And I kind of pivoted. And now I'm not in the business of managing sites. You guys do that much better than me. I'm not a nurse. I did continue on with my education, but I'm not a nurse. I can't treat patients. So that's why I realized, I wanted to expand Corlexia to focus on partnering with community sites and doing anything that we can to help promote recruitment and expedite studies for people. So that's kind of how it's morphed and grown.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, whether you're a big or a small site, your lifeblood is recruiting patients, right? You can land all the studies you want. You can have all the infrastructure you want. You can be crazy sophisticated. You can have investors, but it doesn't really matter unless you can identify and appropriately enroll patients, which, as we know, is an ongoing challenge, right? Before we go too deep into that, I do want to go back just a little bit and kind of pick your brain about, I've experienced in my time, I love working with smaller biotechs, especially versus the Pfizers and the not to necessarily point them out, but a little bit of the world, because they're so challenging. They have so much extra bureaucracy and what have you. But it's interesting because you do see the disadvantages that come with being a small biotech too, in terms of, even to your point, like funding and things like that. So do you think, or I guess in your experience, obviously your experience didn't necessarily turn out to be overwhelmingly positive since the drugs didn't pass, but do you think there's some benefit, especially if you're a small site working with smaller biotech? Do you think smaller biotechs are more open to working with sites that maybe aren't as established just because they can be a little more flexible? Or I guess even just in general, what sort of differences did you really hone in on that make, working with small biotechs maybe better for sites?
I think it's interesting, and even what we all know is, we've heard it a million times. You can have the A team or the B team. Like you can be working with Pfizer and Merck and you have a great team and everything's perfect. And the same goes with small biotechs. And what I find interesting is, you've been in this industry for a long time too. 20 years ago, there was pharma and then there was little biotechs. And we thought these biotechs were so innovative and they were more entrepreneurial. And I think it's kind of melded into one. We see a lot of crossover. So what I personally find very frustrating is there's some biotechs that are just becoming like they want to be big pharma. And I think I saw, I don't know if it was you or somebody else on LinkedIn who shared something about how if we're more married to the process than the patients, then we've lost, right? And I think that I see some biotechs that are thinking that way, and I don't know why. Your whole claim to fame is to be innovative. So it varies, right? But I do think what you're saying, let me think about the last client I just been working with is the ophthalmology client. So it's a small company called Claris Bio that I adore. And they're working in, I think I called you actually, Brad, about this one because they were working in neurotrophic keratitis. And it's a hard study to enroll. So these guys are open. They are open to smaller centers, right? Because they need recruitment. So these are people that will open their ears and eyes to say, okay, what can you help us? So maybe, but they're the A team. So.
Well, yeah. And I think, for us, again, my experience of working with smaller companies like that, it's sort of, all the people who work for the company, basically, right? I've got direct line to sometimes even the CEO, even as a small site, which may seem insane, but at the same time, I think especially if you're a site that is a little innovative and doing good work, they start to learn from you, and it becomes really more of a partnership than it feels when you've just got a team of rotating CRAs coming to your site from a big pharma sponsor. It seems like there's a lot more opportunity for success, especially as a small site. So again, if you're a smaller site, I do recommend trying to hook up with some of these smaller biotechs, assuming that patient populations work and everything makes sense. So I just love that. I do sort of, we talked a little about Dan Sfera off air. I know one of his big things he shouts about is small is the new big. I feel like there's a little bit of truth to that, maybe in both sponsor and the site side.
I think so too. And I remember actually going back to the GI thing, we were at one of the digestive DDW. I think we were at the DDW meeting. And I was running around like a little spaz like I often am. And I'm like, where's the hot site? Who can enroll a colitis study? And I heard about this doctor in Louisiana and small center. I think they're called Delta. I don't remember, but they were a smaller center. And they were just enrolling like gangbusters. So this doctor became like, the Mick Jagger of the conference because everybody wanted to get to him. So I think you're right. If you perform, if you're a site that performs, we'll find you. It doesn't take much because I do think it's hard to break in because if you have no data, no previous studies, that's tough. And I think you and Dan probably talk to people about how to break in. But once you break in and you have some performance to stand on, I think it's much easier.
True, and easier said than done. It's certainly not always easy, but again, I've just loved the idea that I've found that they're more willing to listen to the sites who are successful, regardless of size. And We've worked on studies with small biotechs where we're by far the smallest unknown site, but been able to out-enroll big, well-known, nationally known centers, and the sponsors take those learnings back to other sites. So again, I just think it creates a little more collaborative situation. But like I said, easier said than done, right? So recruitment, huge issue. We know, you probably know the stats better than I do, but I know that there's a huge percentage of trials and even sites that never enroll a single patient. Another percentage that enroll one. And it feels like, as you see study newsletters, at least from the site side, that, about 20% of sites might enroll 80% of the subjects across any given trial. So do you feel that's a reflection of site practices or maybe site selection, or sort of where do you think we've gone wrong with the way we're handling recruitment as things stand?
I think that's perfect. And I put a posting out yesterday about this, that there's not one thing, and there's not one thing for one study. So, let me go back even to this last client that I was working on. We basically had a library of services, and I found it intriguing. Like, one of the things we did is we did printed ads, trifold things and posters at the sites, the stuff we've seen. And then, so for that client, what they did, they had hired Corlexia to help support their CRO. So I think that's an important message I would like to convey, is that CROs are great. They're doing the best they can. They're doing data management and startup and everything that goes along with being a CRA. Often they cannot have the time to drill down to hold the site's hands for recruitment. So when I see many CROs now are building recruitment departments, but they're not there yet. So that's, some are. If you're in a QVIA, so PPD, you probably have it. But, a lot of us like working with small, mid-sized CROs, and we don't always have the support we need. Data, clean, low queries, that's where their energy might be for the bulk of their visit. Are they going to have time now to go talk to who might be doing marketing at the site, or pick the brain? Or, one of the things that I do is when I call a site, I say, yeah, I know, you get it. We can do print ads and radio ads. We can do those obvious. And then when I often say, but how about community events? Is there going to be like an ophthalmology walk? Is there going to be an outreach? Are there, what else? Can we do a little bit different? Sure, we can bring our printed ad, we can put our printed ads on your desk, but nobody's picking them up. So if we just show up at like like in my town, they have like a booking for looking, there's a walk, a run for visual disabilities. And if you hand out the flyers there, that's much more powerful. So I think that's a lot we can do for recruitment. Depends on the site. And another thing I was going to add, which I found so intriguing with the last one, is when I called the sites and I said, how do you like these printed things? Two of the sites were like, I love it. Two of the sites said, I hate it. I threw it in the bag. So you got to talk and figure out what works. And then another thing that I found, which about these bigger academic centers, like you mentioned, like if you go to a Tufts or you go to, an MD Anderson usually knows pretty well, but, they're varied. So if you go to one of these bigger institutions, we usually pick the KOL. We pick the important guy or gal that we see up at the podiums.
Sure.
But then these people, they don't, we all know they don't have time. And what I have found is if you can find the residents and the fellows and then, the rotating residents, they're the people that are going to really help you. So we, they are trying to make a name for themselves. They're eager. They're trying to impress their PI. So what we started doing is almost monthly pizza lunch and learns. And half the time people, they came in, they grabbed a piece of pizza, they left. That's fine. But they keep seeing your name. And they're like, oh yeah, you have that NK study. Oh, okay. So again, that works for a bigger academic. It doesn't work for probably your site. Well, it might work for you. You guys have residents, but it varies. And I think that we have to be creative.
Well, yeah. And I think, again, and something I talk to sites, whether they be more academic or modeled after academic sites or, independent community sites or everything in between, I think there's a lot to be gained from, look, to your point, we all know this. The PI is not always the one, even, with the most, engaging, making sure all patients are being informed. I mean, look, they do their best. Some are great, some aren't as great, everything in between. But oftentimes it's making friends with the clinic staff. It may not be residents or fellows, but it might be a nurse or an NP or even a MA or someone checking people in at a front desk. I think that's really undervalued because a lot of it's just getting the opportunity in front of people, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, even someone at a check-in desk doesn't have to know everything there is to know about the inclusion criteria. But if they've got a handout or something they can, ensure that patients are seeing, I mean, that can go a long ways. And I think, again, we don't always appreciate the small things. You mentioned community events, and this is something I know like we as a site have been unfortunately not as good at as I would like to see. As it's tough as a small site too. You don't always have somebody to go track down the event, figure out how to get involved and organize that. I think that can be challenging, but I know, especially in other sites I've talked to, those have been huge opportunities for them just to get in front of the community, right? I mean,
it is. You need to have the staff. I mean, there's this one site we had down in Texas, and again, for ophthalmology, a lot of these doctors they're performing LASIKs, and so they have an entrepreneurial spirit, a lot of them anyway, because they're trying to attract patients. So like this one site has a marketing person. So she is knocking on doors already. So now that site gets it. So they were a great enroller because they had a person going door to door and raising awareness. But I think that goes back to our other concern that the whole world is having, staffing issues, right? People are understaffed. They're doing a million jobs. That's why a recruitment service like Corlexia or a CRO that has it already can do a lot of benefit. And what I find frustrating, this is a different topic, is that sometimes our industry overcharges for things, and people get this idea that, if I hire a recruitment firm, it's going to be $150,000. It doesn't have to be. It could be as simple as putting someone there to help support a couple of your sites. So that's kind of how we like to do things with Corlexia. So look, if you just have a handful of sites and need a little bit of extra support, we'll just do that. And I think, honestly, our industry, and I know personally because I was running multiple programs, it many times hired a recruitment firms and wrote them a check for $150,000 and got nothing, not one patient.
Right.
Well, it's just the price of business. And I would argue that's ridiculous. I really think it's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what we sort of write off as the cost of doing business is, I think, kind of outrageous in the clinical trial space. But I mean, what would you say too? I mean, a lot of sites have been sort of let down or otherwise inconvenienced by like central campaigns that you see CROs and sponsors do. I still think back to the Acurian days. Mm-hmm. I don't even know if they're still a company or not, but
I think they got bought by a CRO.
Yeah, that I believe that. But essentially sifting through 75 patients in a portal, and these patients don't even have the disease that we're looking for, but somehow they've managed to get referred in through a central campaign. And pretty soon you sort of lose the spark that, a coordinator or a recruitment coordinator, whatever you may have at your site, would have otherwise had, right? So a lot of these people have been burned. They hate the experience. I mean, is that something... I don't see as many central campaigns. So I don't know if that's still, do you feel like that's still a sort of pervasive issue?
I think, and actually I was talking to my partner about this. Maria Fran is my newer partner at Corlexia. She had been selling CRO services for many years. And this is why she wanted to join me, because she's like, I feel like we're missing the boat on this. So she had said to me just last week, she said, Jen, all of this AI and all of this talk that everybody's doing, we can go on Amazon, we can go on CVS, and we have all these new technologies and AIs, but unless there's a human being connecting the dots, it's worthless. And that's what I personally think. And that's why for Corlexia, I'm like, listen, I'm not going to invest in an expensive platform because there's a new one every month. And some of them work great and some of them don't. Like, I know Patrick at ValidCare.
Mm-hmm.
Like, Patrick has this wonderful platform to sort of as you know it well. I think you're working with him on it. So I had reached out to Patrick, and you could probably explain his platform better, but it's for pre-screening and doing more electronic enrollment. So Marie and I were working with a potential client that was looking for 30,000 women, pregnant women, and I thought, wow, this is perfect for Patrick's platform, right? Now, but Patrick's platform might not be perfect for a super rare disease that will only get one patient for help. So that's why, for me, I think there's not one solution. And these databases and lists of patients, unless they've been vetted, they're just another burden.
Yeah, well, yeah, to your point, we're seeing more even, EMR abstraction and
the ICD codes.
Right,
Half the time the ICD codes aren't right. Like for neurotrophic keratitis, we did that. We said, okay, let's search through these ICD codes. And because that was an unusual disease, 50% of the time it wasn't. It was just some kind of corneal irritation that got coded to that ICD code. So
yeah, and we see this all the time. We do, we work with big systems and small practices, but if you go in and query an ICD-10 code, you may come back with some big number, and you're like, great, there's 1,000 patients, and then you sit down and go through them, or you sit down with the doctor, or you sit in clinic and wait for these patients to come in, only to realize most of the data is garbage. So if it's garbage in, it's going to be garbage out. So I mean, there's certainly a lot of companies pushing this technology. I just feel like it's never going to live up to its promise. It can certainly be helpful, and it can help you sort of narrow your funnel instead of trying to look at every single patient or whatever the case may be, at the site level. But I still feel like it's never going to really fulfill the promise, just because the way these things are used are they're more for billing than really having an accurate patient record, right? So, ultimately you end up with just as many patients that data is either just completely wrong or been misinterpreted in some way. So, I mean, that's, again, I feel like people are sort of preaching that as a potential answer. But to your point, at the end of the day, I think this is for all of the clinical trial space. It's customer service, really.
Mm-hmm. Another one for the eye study is we opened up this great center in Albany. Actually, no, that one wasn't Albany. It was somewhere in the Midwest. And the coordinator said to me, I have a great patient. He's a farmer. He lives pretty far away, but he's perfect. He needs the help, and he's caring for his grandson. What can we do? And I said, well, gosh, we could send him a car service. And that's what we did. And the patient enrolled and was grateful, and I believe was a responder. So, that's exactly it. It's patient services. It's caring about, what can we do? Yeah. What about people that are, visually impaired or handicapped and can't get in? There's so much we can do, and it's a case by case. It's like you said, I focus a lot on the coordinators, but you're right, it's the whole team. It's the person checking them in, it's caring. And another thing that we actually just did that was fascinating, and I'd love to introduce you to him. There's a coordinator that's become a pretty good friend. His name is Josh, and he does a little talk about how to engage your PI. He works for a great PI, and they're high enrollers. And I had said to him, what's your magic here? What do you do? He said to me, because Jen, it wasn't long ago that we were all traveling for investigative meetings, right? And we loved it. It was a little perk for us. Sure. He said, most coordinators, they're not doctors. They're not going to the meetings. They're not on the podiums. And I said, okay. So I went back to the sponsor and said, how about a study coordinator meeting? And we did. It was last weekend. They had one in San Diego. They're having another one in Miami next week. And these coordinators are thrilled. And guess what? Recruitment bounced up.
Well, yeah. And even I've posted about these same basic idea, even in things like an ongoing, again, communication study newsletters, things that, if I'm a site and I'm struggling with enrollment, I would love to be able to look at the 3 most successful sites and say, hey, man, what are you guys doing? What are we missing here? And sometimes it may be something that you never would have figured out on your own. It may be something simple and obvious that has just eluded you, but we're really not utilizing like the collective knowledge of the sites and the coordinators. Because look, to your point, coordinators run the show. There's no two ways about it. You've got great PIs, of course, and some are more involved than others. But at the end of the day, it's usually the coordinator in the trenches doing the, quote unquote, dirty work. They're identifying patients, reaching out, having conversations, and it's kind of making things really happen. So the more resources, knowledge, best practices that can be shared, the better. And something somebody pointed out on a recent post is like these kinds of things might be hard to actually get like a quantitative like ROI on, but I think they make such a significant difference that people just oftentimes don't recognize that.
Yeah, and I do think the reality is, and the higher level, the more of a KOL you have, the more true it is. The patients will listen to the doctors, and then they're going to look deep into the eyes of the coordinator and say, hey, what's going on? Should I do this? And they're going to ask them, and they're going to make the human connection. So it's important, very important, to engage our coordinators and make them feel just as valued because they are. And besides, it's the right thing to do. I think most of us do this because we like it and care. So why not?
Well, yeah, we want to help solve the problems, and I'm often guilty of complaining about a lot of the issues that we deal with, but ultimately it's because I love what I do, and we all do, right? Otherwise,
and we can do it better. It's like sometimes there's such easy ways. They're like, why aren't we doing this?
And I think it is interesting. I think there's like a little bit of a dichotomy at the site level. Some sites don't talk, right? Like everyone feels like, if someone else succeeds, it somehow impacts me negatively versus, again, sharing best practices. What do you do? What works? I mean, we can all succeed better, especially if we share our information. I mean, it's the whole reason I even set out to make this podcast, just so, we can all learn from each other, like what's useful, because ultimately, again, I think it's, if we all can succeed, it's better for humanity, right? I mean, isn't that the idea?
Yeah, that's what we always say, and that's why we have this community of Edie and Patrick, and all of us work together, because it's not a zero-sum game. It's just not. There's a lot of patients that are ill. There's a lot of people that have bad insurance, no insurance that we can help. It helps everybody, and again, we don't want to shelf the drugs that may be promising. So. And I found that too, like even with some sponsors, they'll be sort of like, you don't want to share, like if we're planning a meeting and I say, okay, we're going to have all 15 PIs there. And some sponsors will be like, well, PIs are private. They don't want to share that they'll be there. Well, why not? Most of these guys and gals went to school together. They're friends. They probably do. They look forward to being together. So I believe we build that collaborative team, and it helps everybody, especially the coordinators, because there's some of them are young and they're trying to learn, and why not help each other? I mean, because that's what happened at that meeting in San Diego. The coordinators got to have dinner together and talk about what's working, and they left really invigorated.
Yeah, and I think that's where maybe sometimes the investigators' meetings, even the sponsors of CROs, kind of go wrong, is instead of, look, don't necessarily come in with the idea that like you're going to tell the sites how to do it. Just create an environment where they can be transparent and share what they're doing and what's working, right? So it doesn't have to be top down. Instead, just create a situation where, they can openly share with each other and feel comfortable about it. And to your point, maybe that's, getting everybody together, having a dinner. Doesn't hurt to, maybe throw a few drinks in people and let them loosen up. They'll start discovering things that, that they wouldn't have otherwise known. It seems so simple, but I feel like we really miss the mark more often than not.
We do. And even like Zoom meetings, like this one site we just did a lot of Zoom meetings, and we had someone jump on once a week and say, here's some tips that work. Like for, little things that people don't think about. And I think sites even they don't understand, or they don't realize that there may be offerings like, the travel service. If you have a patient that needs transportation, call and ask. They might do it. So another thing we were doing is helping people expand their referral network. So I think that's a big thing, and that's a difficult topic. And I don't know, Brad, if you've ever addressed it. Finding the way to expand on referrals, because sites don't want to give up their patients. But for this one, it was a rare disease, so sites would give them up because they knew they'd come back. So we were doing a lot of referral dinners. And the truth is, nobody wants to go to dinner after they don't want to go home with their families. So I tried for months to do dinners. Wasn't really working. It was working a little bit, but not as well as we'd want. So then we started to realize if we did continuing education events, people would show. So, again, always it's like you're saying, put it what people need to hear, what works for them. It's not about us, right? It's not about the sponsor. They can read the protocol, what works for them, and let them talk. Like, let your coordinators get on the stage. They don't get on the stage very often. So let them up there.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of good points you made in there. I do think, it's maybe even may bring you back to another topic about setting up referral networks. That's definitely challenging. And I've heard it. People don't believe it. I've literally heard a doctor, say to my face, if I lose my patient and they get better, well, what does that do for me? That's not good for me. And that may sound terrible, but doctors are also, a lot of them are businessmen too, right? They have
to pay their mortgages too. They have to cover their rent at their clinics. I get it.
It's challenging to find, I think, a, appropriate ethical incentive or, reason that you can get someone to refer patients to you. And again, that's very challenging. I would love to dig much deeper on that. Again, maybe that's a whole different conversation that we delve into.
I wish someone could figure it out. I've thought about it countless hours, and I think.
Well, I don't know. In my experience, I don't know that I've heard anyone who's really gotten it figured out, and that may be a problem. I think there are companies out there, I don't know if you're familiar with MedVector or like guys like that who are, trying to basically set up situations where like a site like me could work with other treating physicians and do sort of like telehealth collaborations with their patients in order to enroll them, but not necessarily take them fully out of the clinic. There's a lot of interesting
hybrids
options there and opportunities, but we just haven't really, I don't think anybody's really gotten it hammered.
Oh, there we go. That's our next business. We talk about these decentralized trials. There's got to be a way.
Well, to me, that's the perfect middle ground is keep them in a doctor's office where they're being appropriately looked after. But maybe it's their doctor. They don't have to travel all the way to your site. They can be in their doctor's office and then remote in with you and your PI. And again, that's a whole different topic of conversation.
It sure is now, but I think, I bet you, Brad, in a few years, maybe someone will get it. Or maybe someone's going to go start a company that does it.
Yes, again, I love that
For
idea.
now, let's stick with people. I think we still have so much we can do to make things better on the easy way.
I think that's what kills me sometimes is I'm like, look, there's a lot of low-hanging fruit within the current model. Not that I'm, I play devil's advocate and I beat up the idea of DCT sometimes, but I'm not necessarily against it either, right? But I sometimes feel a little bit shortchanged when I'm like, hey, man, there's a lot of things we could be doing in the current model to make it more efficient and work better and, maybe not bring in some of the challenges immediately that, decentralizing brings. And I feel like those really get overlooked in lieu of like, oh, look at the sexy new DCT platform. Let's go look at that. Well, that's fine. And there's a place for that, but let's fix what we can easily address, which I think is a lot still.
I agree. And I haven't heard you beat them up, but I agree with you. I've been beating them up in my head too, because I've been like, we've been trying to do this for 20 years. This isn't all that novel. Like we've always been thinking, like, I was working with Genzyme 15 years ago on a PA study, and they were newborn babies, and it was a 4-hour, 5-hour infusion with a 2-hour follow-up. The babies had to be infused weekly. So we're like, guess what? We need home infusion. We need to bring phlebotomists to your house. We need to make your life easier. it's basically decentralized. Like, not everything has to be in the office. So, I get it. It's a sexy world.
There's still a long ways to go. I mean, we're seeing, companies struggle. Some are getting it right. Some are having a hard time, and it'll all come out in the wash eventually. But again, we can't ignore, the more traditional. And again, some studies are never going to be appropriate for DCT. So we still have problems to solve that aren't going away. You're not going to do a colonoscopy in somebody's home.
Right. Or for the ophthalmology program, we needed to look in the eye. We needed to have the equipment. We needed to measure the change. Nothing decentralized.
So if you're a site and you're looking to maybe more formalize your recruitment strategies, or, what are like the, immediate things you recommend for a site to do if they're looking for help and support? And again, whether it be just strategizing for a better recruitment plan, or maybe even just, increasing recruitment as a whole.
So I guess it's twofold. If they have an active study, then you have a different target market, right? If you're looking for a particular indication, you mean, or you mean for just kind of developing more patients, more of the general outreach.
Yeah, I think even more general even.
Yeah. What I find interesting, and another partner I have is, and I haven't mentioned them yet, is a really fabulous marketing partner in California who does some really, I think you've seen it on LinkedIn. They make really great videos and social media outreach and all of that. And I think what's intriguing about that is it kind of connects this diversity aspect as well. We know that the social media, when you market to more minorities, they tend to see it more and they respond more because they're not always being marketed to. So I do feel like for a site, if you kind of look at your 40, 50 mile radius, and you develop a really comprehensive strategy, be it social media, a little advertising, a little community events, we're here. Another thing I think is interesting, of course, second nature to us and anyone listening, is we understand what clinical trials are. Most people still don't. They really don't. And I find it interesting, like even after COVID, and I made some jokes about that, like, even my landscaping guy thinks he's a clinical trial expert now. Like one time I said, I would do clinical trials. Like, like COVID? You mean when they did nothing? Yeah, we did some trials, did a few, but I think people still don't get it. They don't understand. They don't understand that they're not necessarily going to get placebo. They don't understand that they're not going to be charged, that they get cutting edge research treatment. They see a top doctor. They get their labs for free and their assessments. So I do feel like we can do more awareness, right, about how beneficial it is for people and our society.
Yeah, we still definitely lack more broad awareness. And yeah, I guess the COVID situation was certainly a double-edged sword, right? Because a lot of people became more aware of clinical trials, but maybe not under the best context, right? Like you said, now a lot of people are experts, right, on what clinical trials are.
And they're even more skeptical. We still have our history to deal with.
Yeah, no question. And I think regardless of what you think about vaccines, and I'm not going to go into any of that, but the whole situation can certainly could have easily created more skepticism, regardless again of what you think about vaccines. And, I'm all for the vaccines. I got no issue, but I think, even I at times can look at it from the outside and be like, well, yeah, some of it sure looks a little bit sketchy, even if you do fully believe and have no issue with science. But yeah, definitely a double-edged sword. Well, fair enough. Where can people find you online?
So if you're on LinkedIn, please reach out to us. You can reach out to me. I usually put anything on both my personal and my company site. So the company, it's called Corlexia Clinical Services. And we can help support sites directly, but, typically we help support the biotechs and the CROs, but we love sites. And if you are a site, though, and you'd like to reach out to me, please do, because we do always have upcoming studies. As you know, Brad, that's how I met you, because I said, I have an NK study. Can you help me? So we'd love to know about you and add you to our list of community network, our network. So when we hear about upcoming site studies, we are working on some oncology studies now soon. So LinkedIn, or of course on Facebook, we're on Facebook. We have a website. It's corlexia.com, corlexia.com, or call me whenever you need. Me and my team love talking about this stuff, as you can imagine.
Yeah, we'll make sure and post your contact info on our show notes. And anything else as we kind of wrap up here?
No, it's been fun. Thank you, Brad. I love following your work.
I appreciate it, and I would like to drill down on the referral thing. So maybe that's something we bring up. Maybe we do a live talk about it.
We do. I'd love to get Josh on the phone, the site coordinator. You would find him. You guys could talk for hours.
Yeah.
And I know he follows you, so he'll probably reach out.
Yeah, no, I love it. We'll look into that. And Jennifer, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
As always, thanks so much for listening to the Note to File podcast. Make sure and check us out at notetofilepodcast.com for episode transcripts, show notes, and guests' contact information. Also, make sure to rate, review, and subscribe if you would be so kind and want to continue to hear great content from the clinical trial community.